forth a little bit about territory, about language, about memory. I have a dear friend in the audience here who works with Shakespeare all the time. And in terms of the creativity of the work that she does, she said once in my presence, Shakespeare never failed me. That is, it was a prompt, to her work. And clearly, Scott, I recognize the vexation, but, I've also heard you speak about the adaptations before, some of these marvelous adaptations. And Joyce, I've not met you before today. I really enjoyed your talk and your regional talk and your account of how it influenced you. So would you perhaps talk to each other a bit before we query you?
I'm happy to be queried for it.
You can query us.
Oh, yes.
Go to.
I'm really interested. I feel like all of y'all in each of your respective talks kind of return to the past with kind of a different lens and with a different kind of motivation, whether it's reimagining or inventing new modes of cultural capital, or recognizing that sometimes that return to the past is a form of resistance also. And I guess I'm wondering, especially Joyce, like your talk definitely provoked a lot of thoughts for me in terms of when you were talking about how your parents in some ways kind of sheltered you from a return to that traumatic past in order to kind of promote the vision of the future. And I guess I'm wondering, how do we negotiate the need to return to the trauma of history, the wave of history, while also attending to the need to engage in that process of invention and to not fall into despair, especially because I mean, especially if you are inhabiting like the category of learning, category where you're learning about the history and magnitude and scale of that violence, it's very easy to fall into despair with that. So I guess I'm just wondering your thoughts in terms of negotiating this.
The first thing I would say is that we do it together, because splitting us apart and losing us, vanishing us is how they win. So the first step in not letting them win is to go together. Yeah, it hurts. But if we stand together now, knowing together what we know, I think we'll be all right.
I guess for me, I think of, I certainly, I mourn those who lost that battle, but I've always been drawn to the people that were miraculously able to negotiate it and be strong in the face of it, and not win and become their enemy. That wasn't winning, but win and remain themselves. And I think I just had a long line of that. I just think of my Duda when she's 16, stealing her family back. I love that, because if you knew it made total sense. No one was going to take her family away from her. And she lived to be 99, God bless her, and was as tough-minded to the day she died. And it was about keeping our identity and, remaining steadfastly sure that Mohawk people will always be here, and not give in to the declension narrative that's just so put on us all the time, that you're disappearing, you're dying out. And I think I've just always looked to those people and been drawn to those stories of people adapting, and they're not particularly famous. They might be those Tuscarora women doing that beadwork, but that beadwork saved them, and it fed their families. So,
I think the thing that I would add to that is going back to the past helps us to see that the present wasn't inevitable, and that the future doesn't have to look like this continuation. And, I teach to mixed classrooms. And as I mentioned, I am a white settler scholar myself, but I think that, as Joyce was saying, this kind of community effort can be liberatory for everyone in the room. And speaking of native adaptations of Shakespeare, one play that I've been teaching lately that's in the first volume of the anthology is a play called Kino and Teresa by James Lujan, who's Pueblo. And at the end of the play, the sense of reconciliation that we get from Shakespeare is not accepted by the Romeo figure's mother, Erie, who is native. And I think that that's a really powerful example of not assuming that the history we got to is the history that we have to accept.
It doesn't have to turn out this way.
Remember? Right there.
Hi, thanks so much for. I had a question about incorporating recommendations of Shakespeare in curriculum. So I personally remember my first introduction to Shakespeare was there, and it's like, oh my God, it's taking so long to kill this. It's taking so long. But now, years later, I went over to the club to go see a Midsummer Night's Dream with my friend. And I have this love for it, but also I'm wondering, what does it look like to have that recognition and decolonization in school settings for students, and would it help to get Shakespeare our way, and how do we put these pieces together? Because I think what happens is when you see white supremacists talking about holding on to classical education, they're talking about Shakespeare as well, and he's saying that white supremacy in this education, but how can we still, hold space for these new adaptations that give birth to these histories and these stories that are really telling about holding balance for both of these things?
One really easy way is to teach the Shakespeare play along with an adaptation that deliberately sets out to unsettle the Shakespeare play's conclusions about racial identity or about the ways that race and sex come together. I've had a lot of success recently with Keith Hamilton Cobb's play American Moor, talking about his experiences playing Othello. So after you read Othello, you read a play about a person playing Othello, and it's like, oh man, I didn't realize that, I bet he's right, so it's not like Othello is ever going to go away. But what you do is you make sure that there are other voices in the room at the same time. Othello shouldn't go away, but neither should the conversation around Othello, and just try and represent that conversation.
I agree completely, because I think the reason I was engaged with it as a younger person was I saw it performed. And in school, it was a whole other thing because it was just horrible. They had each kid read a certain amount of lines. That kills anything. It takes like 3 weeks to read through a 2-hour play. If action is the soul of drama, there's not a lot of action. So
it does take a long time to get to the point where Caesar's killed.
But I do think, just seeing even clips or portions of it and being able to talk about it as performed, as lived, I think that does help. And seeing as many different versions as you can, so it doesn't have to be. It always kind of bemuses me when someone who would claim to be a white supremacist also champions this stuff. Do you read it?
Right.
Or you just know that Shakespeare was white? I mean, if they're banning the showing of a Michelangelo statue in
Right.
that's the classical education you wanted them to have, and it's naked men. You're going to have to deal with those. So I often wonder, they're not really part of it. It's bad faith.
I mean, to add on to that, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that the phrase, the language of Shakespeare often gets used as a synonym for English. But Shakespeare didn't just write in English, right? His plays are profoundly multilingual, and it's always pushing the boundaries of what the English language can do.
Making up new words.
Making up new words, having characters make up languages. So I think that if people read the texts, they wouldn't make those conflations. But another thing I'd add that I've had great success with in the class that I've taught, which has been pairing 3 Shakespeare plays only with several adaptations. I think multiplicity is the key. But I've had my students do these things called context conversations, where they have to research the places that are referenced or the settings of these adaptations or other contexts, whether those are religious or cultural or linguistic contexts, and they have to lead the discussion about what they're learning, so that the mode in the classroom is not, we're here to learn about Shakespeare, but the mode in the classroom is we're here to use Shakespeare to learn new things, whether those things are about each other, about ourselves, about the land that we're on. So I think kind of decentering Shakespeare or signaling for our students that Shakespeare is kind of the tool or the platform can be really fruitful.
Way back.
Yeah.
He's still taking up so much space,
Uh-huh.
right? In theater, education, in English classes across the country, he's still taking up their space. It could be given to others. And I myself through this class as somebody who works with a very good Shakespeare with them. Are we continuing to empower and positionality? And in the hierarchy of things, we have a limited amount of time, we're going to see a limited amount of theater, and we're just still moving Shakespeare to the exclusion of all other. So even when we're adapting it, we're still using his positionality to get our name out of that. Yeah. Right? And we're not promoting works by artists of indigenous artists. So why are we writing it to up so much space?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's only a matter of us letting him take up that space. I think it's one of these places where the Academy sort of sees the given situation that Shakespeare does take up that space and say, well, there must be a way that we can take advantage of this. There's always room for one way that I think is really helpful in sort of decentering Shakespeare and emphasizing, especially to new students, that, he was like one guy in this brilliant generation, is to do like Shakespeare or the kinds of plays that Shakespeare didn't write, which is like he's doing things that other people do not do at all. He's the outlier in so many ways. And so the Renaissance drama class that doesn't have any Shakespeare in it is, I think, really, really super helpful, just in terms of the period. And a class that's, I don't even think, all right, if we have everybody, so many colleges have Shakespeare classes. No colleges have undergraduate Johnson or Middleton classes. Maybe that's one thing that we should think about ourselves, proposing and arguing for. But I mean, let's face it, Shakespeare is not going away anytime soon, because he just serves too many purposes.
And I think where it allows some nimbleness on behalf of the teachers or the possibilities is, if you think of a play like Keynotes, it's not just an adaptation, it is a rewriting. It has nothing, it is not Romeo
It's not
and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
It's like, it's the plot, and Shakespeare borrowed plots all the time, as we know, and this is all that he's doing. He's taking that and saying, what if this were not about the Capulets and Montagues, but it was about Spanish, invaders and indigenous people during the Pueblo Revolt. And he creates a parallel version, but it is not an adaptation. It's just a totally new play based on, as much as West Side Story is not an adaptation. And so I think that it does allow those spaces. I agree that it takes a lot of room, and but I also don't think it's going.
Yeah.
Well, it's like I think Shakespeare exists as cultural capital. I mean, the reason he was pushed down the throats of kids in in boarding school, like Syracuse. I'm a high school teacher, but they forced me to since it takes 8 weeks doing that. Speak afterwards, and it's like,
Yeah.
hey guys, so I mentioned get that today to my seniors who had to get your report. But so Shakespeare always exists. It'd be interesting to trace the sort of trajectory of how Shakespeare became cultural capital, became this sort of standard bearer for being a cultured person, which is what I think the educational system has used him for in America. Interesting. Someone from outside of here to force on all sorts of different people to sort of be a test of, especially Caesar, be a test of what it is to speak correctly, what it is to claim appropriately, that 19th century culture of the reciters,
Right.
That kind of thing. But also, what's so interesting is that Shakespeare himself was the creator of a different kind of being on the outside of the mainstream of the beginning of the theater. But inside the plays, which is what opens them up to these iterations of adaptation, is that the characters are culture. Every one of the characters that I love in Shakespeare is trying to make something new for themselves. And that's what I think it allows us to latch on to those characters in different ways, century after century, in different, in new ways to come to translate the core of the Shakespearean play into cultures around the world. So, how do we think about Shakespeare's cultural capital? And it's a really important thing. And we think of him as the money that we want to if you're Shakespeare, you can recite Hamlet, good for you, and you're now an official, cultured person. But that's not what's interesting.
Right.
Emma Smith, in her book This is Shakespeare, says that one of the reasons why he endures is because his plays are full of permissive gappiness, which I think is something that is something about these texts, because they're performed, but because they're full of holes that can be filled in and reimagined. I taught a class recently all about getting our students to see where there is permission can be really helpful. But I hear your point about teachers being forced to teach. I do a lot of workshops with Texas teachers, and they're like, I don't even like this guy. Why am I teaching this? But it's sort of this generational, they inherit this idea that they have to teach it. But there are other ways.
Generationally, that our responses to different characters in Shakespeare switch tremendously.
Right, Julius Caesar is right at the front of everybody's mind. So that's fascinating. I had a class once where we were reading Julius Caesar and we were looking at these different, bits and pieces of different film versions. And so I just pointed out the Mankiewicz film with Marlon Brando. So at the time, Marlon Brando is basically the biggest movie star in the world, and he plays Mark Antony. But at the point when Denzel Washington was the biggest movie star in the world, and he's playing Julius Caesar on Broadway, he plays Brutus. So, the Caesar is at the front of our mind, but we can't even keep ourselves together as to what these plays are about and why they're important and what's the thing that sticks in front of us. So it can pay attention to what comes in and out of fashion in productions of particular plays. There's somebody.
Please. Well, we went back to the city. Coming back home. You were
each one through two things. You know, Shakespeare context came out of the pattern. Notion that we're interested in was both use the Shakespeare and power, but also add tool to do something else near or against that. And the first is 18th century. The first I thought it was in the Jesuit relations. I don't think it is. Usually my favorite higher higher than the value. But near 14, there's this account of a colonial U.S. Not yet U.S. but colonial British military unit engaging in trade with indigenous people. And one of the trades that's marked down is the volume of Shakespeare for a gun company. But the directionality is that the indigenous people have the Shakespeare and they trade it. And it's one of it struck me as an interesting sort of
So odd.
anti-colonial views, and also a reminder of the sort of sense that I got 5 years ago of the sort of always already there-ness in the US of the presence of Shakespeare for both the colonial object, but also various sort of anti-colonial or unexpected or like use of Shakespeare. And the other one is in its Gilded Age context, in 1901 and Buffalo and Americans. Today's the first time that I really thought of WB some black book as and it's in there that he talks about himself experiencing the transparency of the education system. And the most famous line, I think, that comes from his reflections on that are, I sit with Shakespeare and Winston. And so the claiming of Shakespeare as a leader has had this real influence power. And I think there's a lot of downstream ways in which we see that and the transformation of that. I think that right now all of the people who are sort of ironically noting the various anti-trans legislation happening in the country and stuff, the very quick refrain is wait till these people find out Shakespeare. There's a kind of, I think that embedded in the way that Shakespeare God is a sense of the sort of complicatedness of playing him as a leader from a subaltern position, right? And I can't help but see these things moving in sort of double direction. We have at once of Anglo power in what has become the United States, and also the promise of somehow giving, I don't want to say speaking back to it, but working something else on it. And I
mean, I always like the weirdness of those moments where these unexpected interactions, like the 4 teams in London, but also, Pocahontas goes to a Johnson mask. Never saw that, and just the weirdness of those exchanges, and it's pity that not as much as many of what they witnessed as we did. But I appreciate the.
Well, let me see, looking around the room, I see that lots of people in the room are into the town, they're members of the workshop. And so that means that to try to be here by 9 a.m. promptly, coming up the other way, Portico entrance, to enter the library for a very thorough day, usually back a nice quick national local fund. I want to remind you all of that, now let's get home. And then for all of you who we're not moving into workshop, I do want to remind you that the other free and open to the public event occurs tomorrow night. And it occurs, over on Buffalo's west side, School 77, in a building that's owned by People United for Sustainable Housing. And then an additional housing for 30 lower income seniors, houses in Gina Theater, which is the longest standing African American theater company, in Buffalo, and houses Peace of the City, which uses Shakespeare as one of its speaking vehicles, but yeah, just left. So they are hosts tomorrow night for a series of performance demonstrations by local educational organizations and performance studies around the question of Shakespeare and adaptation. Some of the students in the city, a very important integral, and it is a very special occasion. Young from the basic technical academy law to show us some of the this, those of you who are thank you. And then I think we want to say, thank you so much to our